Right, so my name is Ned Lomigora. I am a board member and IT chair, technology chair for MIT Enterprise Forum Club of New York City. Before we jump into the main event, we would like to tell you a little bit about us, MIT Enterprise Forum of New York. We are a global nonprofit, and the New York chapter is dedicated to the innovation hub in the New York area. We organize monthly thought leadership events on a wide range of topics, from AI to cybersecurity to even drones. We also provide resources such as workshops for local technologists and entrepreneurs. How to become a member on our website. We hope you will enjoy tonight's event and looking forward to seeing you at our future events. Now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists, starting with Christina Dolan, who is also our moderator for tonight. Christina is the founder and CEO of Inside Chains, a blockchain company. Christina co-founded OneMain.com, which grew to be the 10th largest ISP after a successful IPO. Christina has been an investor and advisor to several startups and MIT spinouts, and is a co-founder of several data-driven tech companies. Christina is a MIT graduate and a former chair of MIT Enterprise Forum of New York City. Patrick Kelly. Patrick is the founder of Largo Security and Critical Path Security. He and his team are the inventors of the first converged SIEM platform, which has patent pending for preventing mass casualty events with predictive data models. He's an ongoing cybersecurity expert for NBC News, as well as a guest lecturer for Georgia State University in their Cybersecurity Master's program. Debbie Reynolds. Debbie, the data diva, is a world-renowned technologist, thought leader, and advisor to multinational corporations for handling global data privacy, cyber data breach response, and complex cross-functional data-driven projects. Ms. Reynolds is an internationally published author, highly sought speaker, and top media presence about global data privacy, data protection, and technology issues. Chris Roberts. Chris is currently serving as a Chief Information Security Officer or advisor for a number of entities and organizations around the globe. His most recent projects are focused within the deception, identity, cryptography, artificial intelligence, and services space. Over the years, he's founded or worked with a number of organizations specializing in open source intelligence, human intelligence, and signals intelligence research, intelligence gathering, cryptography, and deception technologies. Dorothy Hill. Dorothy is a strategy and technology advisor with expertise in Bank Secrecy Act, anti-money laundering, suspicious activity reports, know your customer, anti-fraud, anti-collusion, antitrust, law enforcement technology, cybersecurity, AI, machine learning, and data. Dorothy has regulatory expertise in NYSDFS Part 500, cybersecurity, NIST, and Gdpr. Dorothy is a board member and director of speaker series at Dartmouth Club of New York City. Peter Kolarov. Peter spent the past 15 years architecting, developing, and selling award-winning electronic signature and identity access management solutions to global customers in finance. 4 years ago, Peter founded cybersecurity startup Cryonic to deliver decentralized identity solutions for all digital transactions with special focus on highly usable yet hyper-secure passwordless authentication and decentralized identity proofing. He has sold his first US-based high-tech startup in 2001, and to this date is still inventing and developing new products and ventures. Please feel free to send questions during the panel, and we will follow up after the panel and send a link to all the slides we used during the panel. I will now hand over the reins to Christina to commence the panel.
Ned, thank you so much. So can everybody hear me? Wonderful. Okay, so this is a very exciting area, and part of the reason is because according to Aon, 84% of the S&P 500 is now intangible assets. And just to put this in perspective, 40 years ago, only 12% of S&P 500 was intangible digital assets. So you can see why hackers find this such a fertile ground. It's very rewarding for them. And so with this, I am going to open up to this esteemed panel a discussion. I'm going to start off with Peter. Could you share with us what FIDO actually is? Can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. All right. So yeah, allow me to share the presentation. And so hello, my name is Peter Kolarov. I'm CEO of Cryonic, and I'm here to actually give you a 3-minute crash course into the FIDO. So FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online, and it actually represents a free standard for strong authentication. And the reason that we're actually discussing it today is that it is a real option for solving decades-long password problem. And the reason why you should know this is the support for the standard by all modern operating systems, web browsers, and many other industry players. So FIDO is an alliance committed to implementing the common standard for secure authentication. And as a disclaimer, my company Cryonic is also one of the members recently. So how does it actually work in the real world? FIDO implements 2 separate processes, registration and authentication. So during the self-registration phase, you first visit a website supporting the standard. You will be requested to register your credential. Next, you will be explicitly asked by the operating system on your local device or a security key if you want to proceed with this registration. If you agree, your device or the security key will generate a public and private key pair. And finally, the website will store this public key for later authentication. So during the login phase, the website looks up your public key, sends a challenge to your device or security key to prove that you own it. Next, you need to approve it, this login, which can be as simple as a button press, but better using some kind of on-device, ideally biometric authentication. If your device or security key accepts your authentication, it will eventually digitally sign this challenge sent by the website and prove your identity without disclosing any sensitive information about you. So how does this actually compare to legacy multifactor authentication that you may be already familiar with? Because it's wide industry support, there is actually no special software to install on end user devices or use one of those one-off OTP tokens. Most importantly, it's actually not phishable compared to other multi-factor authentication methods such as SMS, push notification, or one-time password generated on mobiles that you have to then enter into this form. And it enables local on-device decentralized authentication of your identity with high level of privacy, and thus eliminating centralized storage of toxic assets such as biometrics, passwords, or other shared secrets. And also should not probably mention that it supports self-registration without administrators going through complex provisioning process such as in PKI infrastructure, and it is extendable to use cases beyond simple authentication to online services such as EID or authorizing even blockchain transactions. So that's all for me for the 3 minutes, and I'm giving word back to Christina. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So that pretty much describes this new standard that's been created and accepted by the world, many technology platforms, et cetera. So this is central to our discussion, so I hope you got that. Now, Dorothy is going to share with us, why do we care? Why is this important, and why are the stakes so high?
Yes, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. All right, so in this slide that I'm showing here, and I don't have a cover slide, is simply, this is the one. I've combined a few sample cybersecurity regulations from around the globe with some points from the FIDO Alliance. We can get into FIDO Alliance a bit later in terms of, the industry trends but specifically, I thought it would be useful to the participants to go through a few examples. So when we speak about, as Peter also mentioned, authentication and protection of PII, personal identifiable information, and other personal information that is captured by sites. As all of you know, you enter passwords. Some of you use the same passwords. Other times you change the password, and the goal is to make it as strong as possible. So there are several regulations. Specifically, I'll start with the GDPR. Many of you may have heard of this. This came out of the European Parliament back in 2016. So it's well underway, and it requires businesses all around the globe to protect the personal data of EU citizens. And that means, for example, if you are a French citizen and you're working in the United States, say in New York, on the trading floor of a French bank, your data is protected. If you are EU member working, EU member state citizen, that is, say, of Germany, and you're working in Asia, the same applies. There is an important tenet called the right to be forgotten, which is actually the first time we've seen that type of stipulation and what we call consumer right for any EU citizen. So that was the main one, and that was rolled out. It's well underway. Then we saw the New York State, what's called financial services, or we also call it New York DFS. DFS commonly called Part 500 is the short term. The long regulatory act is called the 23 NYC-RR. So this requires supervised entities. So for example, banks, insurance companies, and cryptocurrency entities that are literally licensed in the state of New York to not only assign a CISO, the proper cybersecurity team, but it really hones in on minimum standards for protection and encryption, for proper access controls, and also to ensure, penetration testing on a regular basis, perimeter hunting, et cetera. This particular New York State regulation, also rolled out in phases, is precisely the type of regulation that other states are looking to, that really, New York really set the bar quite high, and it was quite comprehensive. So there are components of this regulation that require companies to report cybersecurity incidents like breaches, which are tracked, and there are fines as well. The last one is the state of California, which pertains specifically to consumer privacy. And this really gives consumers an effective way to control their own personal data. And it also requires companies, many of which are the same companies under GDPR and New York State DFS 500, to protect the consumer's sensitive information, as I refer to PII. And then finally, the FIDO Alliance, and I have invited a PR representative of FIDO Alliance to join us this evening. Really what they're pushing forward in terms of policymakers, not just in the US, but around the globe, is the two-factor authentication fact that no longer brings higher burdens or costs to the entity implementing that. Technology is now mature enough and sophisticated enough to build this into a single device. So whether it's your iPhone or you're logging into your bank account with your iPad or any other device for that matter. And then FIDO Alliance also is promoting governments around the globe that to promote and require strong authentication. Make sure it's the right authentication method. I mean, this is a very general description, and we can certainly get into technical components, but I just wanted to provide a high level, a few sample regulations around the globe that are already implemented, and B, a few of the essential FIDO Alliance key points, which they, again, not only have proposed, but are working to implement for policymakers.
And thank you so much, Dorothy, because this is a very critical piece of the overall puzzle. I mean, we had Peter describe what FIDO is, and now you've shared with us some of the regulations, tells us a little bit about, why this is important. Now let's transition now from here to, kind of defining some of the statistics and how big this problem is. And Debbie, you're going to have to unmute yourself, but if you can, Debbie, if you can share with us, if you could share with us, some of the statistics on losses and hacks and financial value, because we've heard about what it is, the regulations, and now talk a little bit about the industry statistics.
Sure, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. The industry statistics in terms of hacking and phishing are off the charts, especially now with COVID-19. Recent studies say that a hacked record for a company cost the company about $150 per record. And this is staggering considering the fact of the number of records that are being hacked or phished. The majority of records that are being hacked, I think they say in the 80% range, contain some level of PII. And then there are stats about the average cost of a hack to a company being around, I think it's 3.5 million, but in the US it's even higher. It's up to over $8 million. So it's a pretty significant amount of money and a pretty significant problem with passwords. There's also a statistic saying that most or average people have about 90 different usernames and passwords to accounts, and this is basically unsustainable. So as more services come on board and people want to be able to get into new technologies, it is counterproductive to actually create a lot more information out there about the individual, especially because of hacking. But then also it creates a privacy issue as well. So can you defend yourself against 90 different companies or opt out or opt in to 90 different services? So this is one reason why looking into being able to have sort of a fast, a secure way to authenticate to services is really important. And it also cuts down on a lot of the things that hackers take full advantage of with, the volume of accounts and the fact that people, reuse passwords and, this is the one that I like the most is that, say a system administrator creates a really difficult password and the person just writes it down on the Post-it note. So basically it kills the reason why you did it in the first place, and it's not a very secure way to move forward.
Okay, so Patrick and Chris, you're out in the field, and Peter as well. Patrick and Chris, we haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts in terms of this problem, industry statistics, losses, hacks? Define the problem from your experience.
I'm being very direct. I mean, since we created a password and we used it for authentication, we've done it wrong the entire way. And then where we've tried to fix passwords and authentications, it's not been truly, reinventing, how we're going to approach, authentication and identification. We just continue to bolt more things onto the way that we have gone about doing the things that haven't worked in the past. Additionally, I think the password reuse number is low. That's being quoted by FIDO Alliance being 51%, because my experience tells me it's a heck of a lot higher. And another challenge that we've had, ever since COVID hit is companies weren't prepared, to go from having 5 to 10% of their workforce being remote to having 95 to 100% of their workforce remote. So instead of having a plan and knowing what they were going to do, we essentially just turned our corporate networks inside out like a sock. And the things that we believed were sitting behind firewalls, and they were sitting, behind two-factor authentication and VPN tunnels, they're not there. Remote desktop with just single username, password, logon, it didn't grow by small linear amounts, but it grew exponentially. And the breaches that we know about right now, just speaking strictly from educated knowledge at the moment, is a fraction of what we're going to hear about in 2021. And the problem is the problem set is that even if we apply FIDO to the places that it can be applied, such as online websites and large organizations that can roll this out, most companies don't have the technical expertise to roll this into their own platforms where they have to review the open source standards and get these things in place. And we talk about how it's going to be a low burden to implement a new control for us to do authentication with, but I don't believe that's entirely true, because you're either going to get a new device that supports it, you're going to roll out infrastructure, prevent folks like me from breaking into the network, not using a web app. And then during COVID, we have to deploy and train people how to use this thing. I think we have to take this problem serious, and in order to solve it, we have to respect the problem, or we're just going to bolt something new on and come back right to the same place. Chris, what are your thoughts?
You're muted.
I just realized that dumbass here can't even solve technology. Let's face it. I got the easy job. I can basically say everything he said, but I'm gonna probably add to it and probably be a little blunter. We, for the last 40 years, have done nothing more than band-aid the problem. Let's be perfectly honest. To Patrick's point, we came up with this whole idea in the password, user ID and the password back in the mainframe, the early mainframe days, and we've band-aided it since then. So that's number one. Number two, we're in 2020. We've had DEF CON now for what, 27, 28, 29 years or whatever it is, one of the security conferences. And, we look at how we are. 2020, the top password, 123456, the most complicated password in the top 20 used today, add 7, 8, and 9 onto the end of it to really confuse the hell out of us. So as nice as I can put it, A, we're screwed, and B, we've lost. And we've done nothing more than put more and more band-aids on this. So my concern are twofold. Number one, we're talking to ourselves all the time. We're doing a really nice job of telling ourselves that we need to fix the problem, but we haven't done a good job of how do we do it effectively to the other 7-point-something billion people on this planet that use technology. We haven't come up with something that says, here is something that identifies the right person at the right keyboard at the right time. And you look at the FIDO Alliance and what they're doing, and I love the concept of the whole no password kind of mentality. It's stealing it from Trusona and Ori and the crew. That whole concept of bringing a no password architecture, I think is good. My concern is, how are we building that architecture out to make it much more scalable, much more effective and usable to everybody? Not us. I really don't give a shit about us. I care about my mother. I care about her ability to effectively use the technology in a way that keeps her safe. That's where I want to see this going effectively.
Hey, Peter, so you want to challenge that?
Yeah, I definitely agree that this should be something that the grandmother should be able to use. And FIDO to me is really just a standard, like something to build on, and this is what we're effectively doing. In Cryonic, we are working on a solution that is as simple to use as, I don't know, I like to compare it to a car keys, everybody knows how to open a car with your remote, you just click on it and it opens, and you don't have to give anyone instructions to do this. So this is the level of usability that we are trying to target,
Peter, there are 7 billion people on this planet. Only probably a fraction of those drive and know how the hell to use a car. My mother is not in among them. It's not as easy as that. That's the problem.
And
okay.
I just feel like, as much as I want this to work, like I've spent weeks and weeks studying this, and I really want this to work. But the problem I'm seeing is that this isn't going to lower the amount of breaches as we hope it will. And the reason why is most of the breaches haven't been caused by a single user reusing a password at scale. Most of it is due to, like Equifax using admin and password on the border, or leaving systems unpatched where you don't need authentication at all, or just genuinely not caring. about doing anything about this, because most of the large companies that have been breached that affect us individuals, grandmothers and ourselves included, they have no real penalty. Like if you look at how it took place, they were trending on the stock market. There was a breach, it dropped, insurance covered most of it. In fact, many of the organizations just rescheduled their entire tech refresh so they could use the insurance money instead, and then shot straight up. And in most of the companies, the stock just kept climbing. They're actually worth more after the breach than before the breach. And you have companies that got ransomware like FedEx and the others that, instead of like stepping back and saying, okay, we're really going to do something different here, we use the insurance money to do a complete tech refresh. And if the cyber insurance policy wasn't right sized so that you could use the cyber insurance money payout to do it, they would actually take the machines and just throw them in the dumpster and say that they were unusable by another reason, and they got the money anyway. So I want FIDO to work, but kind of tying into what Chris said, unless organizations really care and this really matters to them and they really want to do something about it, we're still going to see the breaches that just bypass authentication.
So
and
Dorothy,
that sucks.
Dorothy just told us, so Dorothy, you have to unmute yourself, because you just told them that now the stakes are up because all these regulations are pretty new, and some of them are after this Equifax. I mean, especially the DFS 500 and California. I mean, Dorothy, what do you see as the, do you think that the executives themselves feel the liabilities? I mean, because they're now saying that, the insurance companies are worried that board risk, executive risk, officer risk is going to be one of the top liabilities that they have to account for now that there's been a bit of a sea change.
Yes, absolutely. Especially among the Fortune 500, in my experience, that if you had asked, a chief financial officer to describe the risks and costs of cybersecurity breaches 5 years ago, probably would not have been able to quantify that. Now you have, for example, the Federal Reserve CCAR, which was a submission process for banks. And within that, something called PPNR, where they literally measure the operational risk and the cyber risk for the entire infrastructure, including all the end devices. So yes, absolutely, the fines are higher. It's not necessarily a sanction, like you would see for a bank being sanctioned, for example, for money laundering violations, but specific monetary fines facing all sizes of companies. Yes, definitely a sea change in terms of the mentality. Tone from the top is crucial. I've watched a major Wall Street firm where I spent about 7 years, including working in 5 countries overseas for this global financial institution, go from taking cybersecurity with an operational risk and literally moving it to the front line. So the first line of defense. So the people setting up client accounts, the people who are doing KYC, know your client, taking on more of a cybersecurity mindset. But the bottom line is we have a long way to go.
Make a good point.
You
want to add to that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, so so we'll go back to the challenge on this one. Congratulations, the Fortune 500 might actually think about something. Think being the operative word. We've had PCI for how many years? 15 years or so ish, probably more. How many credit cards are we losing every single year? We've had HIPAA for about the same 15, 20 years. And we've lost in the US 700 plus million records since we started doing that. So my challenge is twofold. One, the audits and the assessments are not effective. Absolutely not. We've seen that. And the controls that they try to put in place aren't effective either. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this position, number one. And secondly, the biggest frustration I have is great, Fortune 500. But what about every single one of the small to medium businesses that we tend to forget? We don't focus on, and all of a sudden I hand them their asses and I come in through their direction, or I just make all of my money on that one.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point. I mean, because when I'm talking to smaller companies about, and these are mid-sized enterprise, about, how they're approaching the audits and how they're approaching their controls, You know, adding another blinky light box, you know, to the rack isn't going to help, because chances are the functionality they needed wasn't something they already owned, but they didn't have the time to learn it. So we bought something new that they don't have time to learn. And something, you know, the other day, someone said, well, you know, I've looked around for companies my size because I don't think I'm a target, and I'm not finding any. And I said, well, you know, the reason that you're not finding anything about those smaller companies is because they're not here anymore. If you've got a breach in Target, you have a breach in Equifax, you have a breach Anthem, you're hearing about them because they're still here. Like, there was enough in the war chest, there was enough time bought, they were too big to fail. Pick your reason. But so, you know, you don't hear the stories about the small business fails because there is no one here to talk about it. They're gone. And until we take this serious and we take the audit serious, and you know, and these people have to look at a multi-generational business where the grandson's not a president that's running it, and he's looking at 100-something years that are completely wiped away. And there's nobody hearing that story because there's nobody there to tell it.
It's interesting. Yeah, there's some interesting statistics on how long small companies will survive after a breach. It's interesting. So Peter, you had mentioned that you've been talking to some insurance companies that are concerned, especially around COVID. Did you want to make insert some thoughts on that, Peter?
During COVID, actually, we noticed mostly breaches in healthcare industry. So yeah, this was I mean, breaches related to passwords or actually related to phishing and thus passwords. So I think this is one major area where, you know, obviously FIDO really helps, you know. So the data breaches are really 80% of them are caused, you know, due to these passwords, and most of these are due to phishing. FIDO is one of the answers to the phishing. So we believe this is definitely something that should be of concern to anybody, you know, who has encountered a breach, whether it's a SME or a big corporate. SMEs, maybe, if I would go back to that, Patrick was mentioning, they're maybe more relying on cloud infrastructure. So on services that are actually not deployed by them, but deployed by big industry players. And these are actually companies who are now working towards FIDO implementation, and they should be doing maybe even faster than they're doing right now. Actually, Microsoft, I think, is a good example. They're probably longest along this route, and they do support FIDO with, we've seen the highest level of the standard. So yeah, I mean.
So where do we think the industry is going at this point?
I think until these solutions are, I think until these solutions are more approachable, you know, and until it's matured a little bit, you know, to where it can be easily rolled into Active Directory. It can be easily tied into LDAP. It can be easily tied into all the other things, you know, other than the Office 365s, and those are important. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're important. But until it becomes more approachable, the industry's not going anywhere.
So here, I'm going to add Patrick to add on to what you're saying. When you turn around and say, hey, I want to add FIDO into Active Directory, that's great. But the problem is you and I, and probably a lot of the audience know, Active Directory is kind of like target number 2 for me. From an adversarial and criminal standpoint and an attacker's standpoint, Active Directory, we talk about passwords. I mean, talk about a treasure trove. It's like, yay, I've got AD, I own everything.
Right.
And so
Forever.
we have, absolutely. And this, you know, again, I'll point out here now, I've got a stake in the ground because I'm obviously hanging out with the Semperis crew. But for me, Active Directory is one of those, I break in, you know, exactly to Peter's point, I'll come in through a phishing scam or whatever. I grab the credentials that are on that machine because maybe they're not FIDO connected. And then I pivot, you know, I start looking around, I do a net stat, and then all of a sudden I'm in the machine at that point in time. Can I get into AD? Yeah, 90% chance I probably can. And then I can harvest everything. So I think the FIDO concept, I love the idea. Don't get me wrong, we're not bashing the idea and the concept. I do love it. We need to do something more than password 1 through 6. No two ways about it. But it needs to be done properly with everybody's buy-in and as part of a greater solution as to how the hell we do protect basically 7 billion people effectively.
Yeah, I love FIDO. I love the concept. I love the approach. Started to build something out with it earlier this week, and then I quickly realized that all of my customers, they're not going to have the resources to do that, and it's kind of picking on two other technologies a little bit, but it's kind of like blockchain and machine learning, right? They're great concepts. I mean, consensus and, which became blockchain was something that we talked about at Georgia Tech in the 90s, and it's wonderful and it caught up. But most companies can't afford to build their own blockchain infrastructure and then apply consensus to the right problems. And if you want to use machine learning, which we talk a ton about, you're 6 figures in the IBM and a Watson license before you even start to load data and model data. Like, I'm just thinking, right, that we're going to have to get these solutions approachable and easily consumable for everyone. Otherwise, we're just going to go back to the well and take more money and make more promises that we can't deliver.
Yeah,
so I hope FIDO gets better.
Yeah, I feel like it's especially the old way of doing things with passwords. It's like when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to do everything the same way all the time, especially you're graduating people out of schools that are so accustomed to doing things in the same way, it's hard to get them out of that idea. It's like, wait a minute, like I can do this more securely. And then to me, it's like the umbrella analogy. It's like, okay, I think it's gonna rain. I take an umbrella and it doesn't rain and you're pissed because it didn't rain or something. So you still have to protect yourself. You still have to, to me, this should really be, I'm glad to see that some of the regulations are really weaving this into how people should do their business processes, because it is part and parcel of being able to run a business and be able to thrive. As Patrick said, a lot of these small to mid-sized companies, the statistics say that some of them, when they have a data breach, they go out of business. A majority of them go out of business within a year. So this is very important.
I mean, the thing I appreciate about FIDO, right, is that as an industry, and maybe not just as an industry, but we tend to define the problems that customers are facing and the world's facing as the problem that we can solve.
Mm-hmm.
If we just graduated and we figured out how to make, device XYZ, then we're going to take half of our VC money and go tell the whole world that that's the problem that they're facing. It is nice with FIDO that we're at least stepping back and acknowledging what the problem really is before we start applying energy to fixing it. And I have to give the Alliance and FIDO an attaboy for that. Like, this is not an easy problem. It's a 50-year-old problem, it conservatively. We've blown a bunch of money building things and then going and telling the world that this is exactly what you need, and it usually isn't. And we fill giant, conference centers like the Moscone Center every year, and we take in billions of dollars to get nowhere. So I appreciate that FIDO at least is starting out by saying, okay, this is a real problem, and we want to solve the real problem, and it's not all the way there just yet, but we're going to open up the standard, so hopefully it'll get there quicker. And I think that that's grand, and I think we have to have more of that. And I want more of that. I'm just hoping everybody else does too.
So what industries do we think are most vulnerable with respect to data?
Right now, healthcare.
Definitely
and
healthcare.
finance. Hands down. Ever since COVID hit, I actually have a whole person that we, an entire 50 hours a week of a person that we onboarded during COVID that spends all of their time pulling data out from the different CTI leagues we're a part of and trying to weaponize IOCs that we see. Healthcare and finance straight ahead, and it's almost always healthcare.
Yeah, let me add a couple of extra things onto that one, if you don't mind. I cannot disagree with healthcare in any way, shape, or form, but what we are also seeing is a huge uptick in manufacturing attacks. So some serious work against manufacturing, and honestly, small to medium business. I mean, they're getting hit anyway. Now it's just getting stupid. There are a couple of organizations I'm working with and I'm very well aware of that are dealing with anywhere from 50 to 100 cases per month of ransomware and basically, you know, email attacks that end up in ransomware. Now they have recoveries. So you're getting hundreds of small to medium businesses getting hit every month. Manufacturing's getting hit pretty heavily now. I did something on it deliberately on LinkedIn today. So and the problem is it's kind of spreading everywhere. I mean, it used to be retail. Well, half the retailers are going out of business, let's face it. And
right.
so
when you say manufacturing, what kind of data are they after? Because I mean, healthcare is different, but what is it they're getting out of manufacturing? They're just taking them down, or?
A lot of it's taking them down. Some of it is obviously the intellectual property, but quite honestly, that's been going on for a number of years. You know, the theft across borders, and we're not pointing fingers in this conversation, but the theft across borders from everybody to everybody has been a huge issue for the last, 10, 15 years at least. Probably a lot longer than that, but definitely we're seeing a lot more of just invasive to go in, cause damage, cause harm, and then ransomware the organizations.
So, I mean, there was obviously that article about Tesla. I don't know if you saw that, where they were trying to buy.
I would have taken $1 million. Sorry.
I think it was another company as well, like it was a cyber company where they were actually trying to infiltrate, and they also, I guess the coin number, he started at 500K and then went up to 1 million, because I guess the going number is like 1 million.
I mean, we were, interesting twist of 2020, like we didn't have enough problems, but we started, I've been telling everyone for a very long time that in order to deliver ransomware, you have to be able to read and write a thing, which means you don't really know if the data has been siphoned out or breached when you have a ransomware attack. But you can't encrypt something that you can't read and you can't write to, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I've been saying this a number of years, and we get to 2020, and we see ransomware dropped, data siphoned out to a Tor site, and the auction starts. And you either pay it, which we've worked with companies that have done both in 2020 that say, we're done, we're just going to pay it, hope for the best, and then the others that don't. And if you don't pay it, they start to auction off chunks of it so that the organization stays in the news feed as long as possible. And they get as much money as they possibly can. And when cyber insurance companies started negotiating with your ransomware attackers, we took this from, well, this might be a successful campaign, to, well, yeah, we're going to get something, because the cyber insurance has a war chest of Bitcoin that they're willing to ship off, because it's cheaper for them to just pay it, even if they're advised not to, than to pay the claim to rebuild the environment.
But of course, now there's the forensics around Bitcoin that actually follow the Bitcoin all the way. And now, of course, they've been identifying a lot of these players as a result of that, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, but if you're a tens of millionaire or a billionaire in Russia, and you have no aspirations of ever leaving Russia, why do you care?
Yes.
And it's okay. So here's the other challenge on that one. Sort of butt in on this one. It's all down to attribution. Please. Yeah, this is all down to attribution. This is one of the biggest challenges I have with a lot of this. Is I'm Christina. I'll pick on you. I'll take over your computer. I'll use your computer to do what I need it to do. You take the fall for me. You're the one that has my Bitcoin wallet. You're the one that has that. You're the one that has transactions. And I'll move it out of Bitcoin into something else. I mean, the ability now to shift between currencies is way too easy. I mean, part of the reason I get dug into some of the stuff I get dug into is because we are tracking a lot of that. We are doing what we can, but it disappears off that net, and it gets to be a challenge.
Yeah, well, I've already had my phone SIM card ported 3 times, so
Oh,
I
wow.
appreciate it if you don't take over my computer too.
I
So,
mean, attribution though I mean, I believe that, you know, attribution as well as getting the identity, sorted is something at least FIDO is trying to solve one side of it.
Yeah.
But, the thing that I always have told people is, in the cybersecurity industry, we don't deal in absolutes. We never deal in absolutes. We deal in varying degrees of confidence. And when it comes down to attribution, unless you are sitting there looking at Dread Pirate Roberts sitting on a laptop in the corner of the library, typing things into the keyboard while you're standing there with a camera on him, it's amazingly hard to attribute attack, and how we are passing around code and and crypto, well, basically just build labs of code bases. I mean, how do you know? Just because you saw, code formatted when you reverse engineer this thing to this thing, that they're related, because you don't know. It's all moving around.
yeah, there's a great TED talk by a woman who I guess now works at Andreessen Horowitz and heads up the crypto fund, that talks in her TED talk about how they sort of identified some of the hackers that were involved in one of the big hacks. So it's interesting. I mean, some of it was data, some of it was behavior, some of the stuff was offline. A very interesting little puzzle there. And so, yeah.
Just one thing, if you don't mind. The
Uh-huh.
person, the big hairy thing that's
Yeah.
sitting here with a beard is a hacker.
Okay, so why don't you tell us what you go after then?
What I would rather do is say, if you're the adversary that's breaking into somewhere and you're the person that's causing the damage, you're an adversary or a criminal or an attacker. The hackers, that'll be all of us. That'll be the industry that started with us as the hackers. We're trying to do the right thing. We're the ones that are actually sitting in these forums going, hey, we want to help. We want to do the right thing. We're trying to do the right stuff. There's a lot of awareness in our industry at the moment that those of us that are hackers are the ones on the right side. The folks that are actually doing all the malicious stuff, that's your criminals, your adversaries, your attackers, your nation states. Use whatever terminology that you want, but just a quick one on that one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, if we ever properly reclaim the title, it's going to be great, because every time a family member tells someone that, yeah, my son is a hacker,
yeah,
Right.
I kind of sit in the corner and I just brace myself for, well, for instance, where these terms get kind of weird, and I'll make this story short, but, we had traveled into Mexico on a legitimate engagement, and I had been on a talk, and someone had called me a hacker, and it was great. Didn't mind it. I have a black hoodie too. Totally good about it. But when I flew back out, they ended up pulling me to a side, and I was held in Mexico City 5 different times, and then held again right before they let me board the plane, because the Central Bank of Mexico hack was during the time that I was there, and the name hacker was affiliated to my name. And Ender Greer, a guy that I traveled with, he was completely appalled. He was like, why? Like, they're going to let me go. I'm the one that actually, had a misdemeanor in my teens. You've done nothing. They don't want to let you on this plane. So I'm very careful, because I've used that title for years. I've done good for years. But it will prevent challenges in leaving a country.
Or trying to come back in. I mean, within a lot of the training that's mandated by global financial institutions to employees and consultants, I've noticed they really do differentiate between the ethical hackers. Sometimes they talk about the white hats, but that's a separate discussion. And then the malicious hackers. So Chris, what you referred to, the nation state, the highly organized crime rings, the lone wolves, the teenager, working out of his basement, hacking in. That's the difference, the terminology that is between ethical hacker and malicious hacker. I don't know, Debbie, if you agree, or anyone else can opine on that.
I agree with that. I think, this area needs a lot more education, and I think it's almost like the white hat, black hat cowboy thing, right? So it's an easy comparison that people make, but it's really
Yeah.
more complex than that.
And to your point, Debbie, as well, I hate to say it, especially with current sensitivities, one of the biggest things we try to avoid is this whole freaking white hat, black hat rubbish. Because, hey, look, white is good, black is not. No, let's quit that shit, shall we?
Exactly.
Yeah, for all the reasons that we know about.
I agree.
And finally, as we are getting to the point of closing out, I can say that I have hated that.
Yes.
All the way back in the 2000s, it was, well, are we going to put them on the white list or the black list? I'm
Right.
like, what is
Yes.
how about the allowed or the blocked?
Right. How about even like accounts, your accounts in the black, your accounts in the red. Red is also a derogatory term, but moving from that
moving back
to that, I don't see any of those terms or references made on the FIDO Alliance site, and I have really scrubbed it, so that's good.
I mean, so my final, some of my thoughts on this, right, is as we've kind of covered through this, is organizations where they need to try to adhere to things like FIDO. I think it's a great direction for us to start going in, and where it doesn't fit and where it's just not there yet, you're going to have to do 2FA. And for goodness sakes, just do the basics. It's amazing how many organizations would be fine if they would just apply patching and they would do some sort of 2FA. If you can't do FIDO, if you've got to do something in between, if I could go to every single company and just say, okay, this is all I want you to do. I just want you to work on patch management. I want you to work on 2FA. But definitely, I think FIDO is a really good direction. I hope companies and those that are on this call, start looking at it and how they can do things like it and protect themselves.
I wanted to make a quick point, 2 points. One is insurance companies that do cyber, they're going to start tightening up. So they're not going to be paying out like they have been in the past, because there's way too many claims. And then the other point is that the data market is tightening up because of these data privacy laws. A lot of companies are going to be not allowed to transfer data, and individuals are going to become more circumspect about how where they give their data to. So if you're not getting the trust, if customers don't have trust in you, you won't get that data. And part of that trust is being able to protect the data that they've entrusted to you.
So we're getting close to the to the 7 o'clock time frame before we start addressing all the questions. So I want to give you all an opportunity to do some final thoughts here. Quick here before we get on to the questions. What do each of you think that the executives should be thinking about with respect to cybersecurity right now? Who wants to start? Patrick, why don't you go?
I think they need to start looking at things, more along the lines of where their data lives. I think they need to start getting a really good understanding on that. Most companies simply don't know where the sensitive information lives. The other is, try to do things like FIDO. Try to go beyond the regulatory compliance. We've mentioned it several times. The CMMC is coming out this year because, our DoD subcontractors, were basically calling in their ExoStar self-assessments, and PCI isn't really effective because 13 controls is not going to save your company. It's not going to save your company. It's not going to save what you're trying to do. And if you're just looking at things from a regulatory compliance point of view, you're going to have a really, really rough time. And if you're not looking at where your data really, really lives, because there's sensitive information that lives on these, and it lives on employees, personal machines at home now because the company didn't have enough laptops to deploy. You really have to start looking at these things and taking it seriously, and you have to go beyond what is mandated and to what you need to do. If you've got and one little quick one, if someone reaches out to you and they tell you that they have found a vulnerability, they tell you that they have found something that is imminent danger to your company, and they are willing to get on a phone call to talk to you about it, take the damn call. The amount of times that I've reached out to companies to tell them, hey, by the way, I found this thing and you need to know about it. Either they didn't return the call, or if they did call me back, they treated me like a criminal because I had information that they weren't aware that I had, and they somehow felt violated because I was willing to tell them about it. I have spent more time convincing companies that I'm not actually extorting money from them than to just get them to take a call so that I can give them free information to save their asses. So if a professional calls you and said, I want to give you something for free, take the call.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Hey, so
You
Debbie,
would think.
Debbie's the data diva, so I'm going to ask her, what do you think? Oh, your audio's off.
Sorry, I think that C-level folks need to ask different questions. So instead of asking, do things work? You need to ask, are they safe? Is it secure? Are we doing things the right way? Because sometimes people can be lulled into a sense of complacency in some way because they haven't been harmed in that way. It doesn't mean that it can't happen to you. And understanding, just like Patrick said, where does your data live? Where are your weak spots? Where's your, high, medium, and low priority things that you need to look at? What legacy system do you have in the back room that has all these can't be patched because they've been there forever, is a gateway into your network? What about those things? You need to really be asking those questions, because that's the place the hackers go. They look for the low-hanging fruit, and if you're the low-hanging fruit, it's only a matter of time before you have a big problem.
Okay, Peter, you're next. What would you recommend?
Well, I would definitely think about like what toxic assets do I centralize or hoard, and these are obviously credentials and in many cases actually biometrics, that could be accessible to someone or are basically honeypot to these bad actors. So this is something that would be like a #1 list to get rid of and see if it's possible to decentralize it and basically send it back to the users. And yeah, I mean, this was mentioned by Patrick and Debbie already. Yeah, I mean, do not, think about the data that you are storing and hoarding on users.
Great. Dorothy, what do you think?
I like hoarding, the term. It's about archiving, and there are regulations around how many years financial institutions, insurance companies, asset managers are allowed to keep data. I'd say in terms of the mindset or the proactive thinking of a C-level executive or even owner of a small or medium-sized business is do I have the adequate training and awareness among my employees and consultants? How often am I testing their knowledge? That Friday 5 p.m. phishing email, they do this. I don't think they do it enough, even among some of the larger clients to which I've consulted. Should be more often. And I've actually fallen into, a sticky situation, but they're good. They can be quite good. But I'd say 99% success rate, awareness, education, credit unions, and also asset managers. If you think about the billions of dollars in the retirement industry and all the different entities involved, you have administrators, you have original companies setting up the pension plan. Do you really understand, like they said, where's your data sitting? What is your ecosystem? And then finally, I would say, ensure that you are keeping your cybersecurity staff and those working with these various alliances like FIDO fully trained. Take advantage of all the cutting edge training that's available. A lot of it's free as well.
Wonderful. And Chris?
So I think I'm going to take it a little bit simpler. So if you take a leaf out of what FIDO has done a very nice job of collaboration. And I think this is one of those things that industry itself, and that's not just the security industry, but industries as a whole, we need to learn to do more effectively. So for me, you know, if we're having conversations with leadership, it will be those, how do we effectively communicate and collaborate with those leaders? And then how do they do the same back? It's, you know, it's, we can't keep going in there with our technical conversations. We have to have the conversations about risk, about business, about things that matter to the organization. And we have to do it in a way that's cooperative and collaborative. So me, I would take a leaf out of FIDO's book and say, you know, FIDO's done a really nice job of collaborating with everybody. We take a leaf out of that book, we bring it to the business and go, how do we collaborate with you more effectively?
Well, wonderful. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A because we have a number of questions that have sort of been, filling the stack here. So I'm going to, some of them are addressed to particular people and some are open. So let's start with the first one. Many people seem to be concerned that even their local devices will eventually get hacked, and hence don't want to have a non-revocable biometric stored even locally. Does FIDO support non-biometric authentication options, or will it be required, which may significantly hinder its adoption? I think there's a little confusion in terms of how that data is locally stored. I mean, Peter, do you want to address that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, FIDO does not say like you have to do this or this. It gives you the options of different authenticating modes. So one of them is knowledge, obviously. One of them could be PIN code if you are really worried about biometrics being stolen. But on the other hand, if you're using biometrics locally on the device should be secure enough to deal with the biometrics. And obviously, there is a mobile phone where the biometrics is stored, which is more attackable than a dedicated device like a security key that stores the biometrics. So, but yeah, and in short, you can use obviously other factors, not just biometric, but a knowledge factor. So you can have a simple PIN basically instead of just biometrics. Maybe ideally, if you combine them, like this is what we do, we basically allow user to select how they want to authenticate into the device, whether it's biometrics or it's, a PIN, or even a PIN that's spoken or handwritten, and combines biometrics. So, but all of this never leaves the device. That's the cool thing about the FIDO.
If I were going to do it, I would recommend having a hard token and a soft token, being as you have something physical like a YubiKey or something like that, and then you have a backup device that you can do this with. I'm very cautious about saying have a password or a passphrase, because now we're just right back to the beginning. But as I was reading through the documentation from the Alliance and some other ways that this has been applied, it's typically been, if you lose your phone is bricked, something happened, having a second device on, token on hand. But companies such as Google and the larger ones where you're going to see more of this right now, they're kind of treating this as a password reset. So if your token is lost or destroyed or hacked, they're revoking it and basically issuing you another one. But I would not approach the system without having a backup token of some sort that you can use to recover if you really need it. And I'm never going to advise having a password to be a backup for something more secure, because we're just kind of driving forward with our head in the rearview mirror.
Yes, actually, many systems allow you to register more than one key, whether it's a software key or hardware key. So usually, if you lose one, you can use the second one. And now in a more sophisticated setup, you can obviously do some kind of recovery too.
Yeah, we're doing something similar. There's one of the organizations I'm hanging out with over at EthoPass, and we're doing some interesting stuff with numerical sequences and breaking of keys and stuff. There's some pretty awesome stuff. There's ways to deal with it, to Patrick's point, that don't invoke downgrading to something simpler, which
Please
then
don't.
becomes the target.
Yes, you should never downgrade. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
So anybody else want to add to that one?
I just want to add one point, and it goes back to what I said earlier about being sort of caught off guard. It's truly amazing how PII can transfer across the globe, you know, borders. And I'll give you an example. I was asked to speak at an energy conference in mainland China 3 years ago. And literally my email and phone number ended up on 4 different websites, including in Hong Kong. I had to trace every single company to their IT department and tell them to take down my speaker data because someone had not been careful. And we're seeing that was really not fun to play detective and track it down, but I did it and I wiped it out. It was gone. But again, we're talking about the dark web now and all the layers and where people's information is being stored, including erroneous information that can adversely impact their careers, et cetera. So again, the multi-factor authentication, the biometrics, it's exciting. It's definitely an exciting time to ascertain which combinations are the most effective for this solution.
And there are no borders. I mean, when it comes to this, there are no borders. I mean, traffic can be routed anywhere. It can be, you know, there are no borders.
All right, so the next question we have is, can you speak a bit deeper to the relationship between FIDO and blockchain? And I know that, you know, the crypto, you know, the pair, you know, the private key and public key and creating a signature is something. Peter, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, maybe I mentioned it in the intro as one of the possible use cases. Basically, yeah, the technology behind digitally signing the challenge over FIDO can be used either for authenticating into a website, but you can use that same technology to actually sign a blockchain transaction. So you can imagine some kind of a cloud wallet, which actually does not have the private keys in a custody, but actually allows you to keep the keys in hand on a secure device locally and execute a transaction over FIDO protocol, for example.
Well, thank you for that. Anybody want to add to that?
Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to say there's actually a lot of good intel on the good old internet on that one, on how basically the browser, the UTF interface, and the tunnel device actually move the transaction between wallets and the channel. So yeah, there's a ton of stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're trying to remove, you know, the kind of forging of credentials, and we're trying to you know, tighten that sort of authentication chain together, that there is a use case for consensus. I don't know that I really want to expound too much to it, you know, but if you do have a distributed ledger and you are checking its ledgers and doing consensus, there could be some things that could land and be valuable. But for me, in my mind right now, that's a very hard sort of thing to weaponize and make useful in this form.
Well, thank you. So our next question is going to be a little bit different. It's about the specific responsibility that's placed on the board of public, non-public, publicly traded companies with respect to monitoring PII, and similar to like an audit committee. Anybody want to take that one?
I mean, are we looking for who owns the responsibility if something happens?
Sounds like that's the question, yeah. They're like an audit committee that's responsible for that. I mean, I know that, you know, CISOs, and of course, Chris, you probably can talk to that, have to report into the board and do risk assessments and sort of kind of explain what the security posture and all that kind of stuff is. But
I was going to say, give that one, let Dorothy or Debbie see if they want to chime in on that one, because I think they've both got a good amount of experience in that as well.
Right. Dealing with, you know, public, private, you know, board advisory folks, you know, typically that would, in some regard, fall under audit, but it's much, much more than that. So I feel like boards need to expand their thinking beyond just, obviously a CISO or a C-level IT or technology person needs to have a seat at the table, but you also need to really be thinking about not just the legal sense of cybersecurity and privacy, but also the technology and the data sense about it. So I feel like there's too much focus on the regulatory, and maybe this goes back to what Patrick was saying. You can have as many controls as you want in place, and that doesn't get you to the finish line. So you need to really, I think there needs to be a reimagining of the gap here that companies have, and be able to put people on boards and have them do advisory work with them, where they're working with the tangible issues that a company deals with. So you can be perfect on controls and still not succeed here.
I mean, I agree with Debbie. The other side of it, though, is when we talk about ownership, traditionally it's been the CISO. It always goes back to the CISO, and I think a lot of that is maybe due to lack of understanding and education of threats, and maybe we have to do a better job on our side of communicating it. But a running joke for a while used to be, do you want to take that CISO role? And it was like, no, I'm not ready to be a consultant yet. It's just kind of, your shelf life is 2.5, 3 years because you don't have enough buy-in to make that change. There's a breach, you're fired, and then basically you're writing books and you're out on the talk circuit. So I think there's got to be better alignment and communication and what the organization needs to be. So, our CISOs don't become, the topic of a DEF CON talk.
Dorothy?
Yes, I would agree. It's sometimes a steep curve to get board members to that point of truly understanding the cybersecurity risks. You take someone who's, chief compliance officer, tend to be attorneys by background, and they sort of eyes glaze over when you talk about perimeter hunting. But now with these regulations, what's interesting in terms of the opportunity, as I see it, are all of these incident reporting and monitoring can lead to a sophisticated dashboard. And so that's where you convert a lot of the data, what are the sources of the attacks, what are the weaknesses within the organization that allow the board and the C-level executives, and then even family-run companies to understand where they need to dedicate and invest to remediate those risks.
Anybody else? So we can go on to our next question. So the next question is, please compare the security of two-factor authentication with the very random password letters, symbols, digits, not the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but traditional random passwords. I think we're beyond two-factor authentication, so maybe we should look at this as sort of a triple comparison. But
I'll tell you from experience that you can make the password as long as you want to make it. We're not doing a lot of brute force attacks these days, and at least they're not very successful. Password stuffing is, but if a breach a system due to missing patches and other sorts of mistakes, password can be 24 characters long, and it's not going to matter. We're going to be able to pull that out. I mean, doing MFA or two-factor authentication, at least when I get that credential, I have to use some other form of authentication against it. And then, I've actually come to find that the longer passwords make it worse. They're typically reused heavily because they're hard to remember. And then we started seeing where, super rare, super long, complex passwords were used to actually identify a person. So, when we were looking at, some of the trying to remember the exact one now off the top of my head, but oppressive government, threat actors that were using Twitter to kind of pass information back and forth, and Arab Spring, as I recall. And there are individuals that are using multiple email accounts. They're using one that they're using to send data around, and they're using another one, as themselves. Unfortunately, they were using the same super complex password because it was easy to remember. Well, that password wasn't used anywhere else. So it was very, very easy, very quick to match the IP address, or match the email addresses in data breaches, combine those together and see who the person really was. So those secondary accounts were marked to a person based off this super complex password. So you've got to use 2FA. If you can't do FIDO, you've got to use 2FA. Chris, what are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, so I'll keep mine short, sweet, and simple. Pass the hash is a perfect way of doing it. So if you have just a single way of authenticating it, that authentication is put into basically a hash, or it's put into a token. I can take the token, I can move it and arguably do what I want with it. With a multi-factor / two-factor, that's heavily restricted. So it's not as effective. It doesn't completely defeat it, because inside a corporate organization, there are still systems that unfortunately you still have to use a single factor of authentication with. So any kind of multi-factor isn't going to apply by that. But for most common uses, for most people in the world, which is what we're trying to protect, putting multi-factor on, or two-factor, or something that just has a secondary level of authentication, is going to stop me from taking your token and just becoming you in an easy way. So that's in a short, sweet way.
I would maybe add to that that is true as long as the second factor is not another password, which one.
Good point. Totally good point. Totally good point.
And
Yes.
So that
if the answers to your challenge questions can be found on ancestry.com, you're
Oh, never mind bloody Ancestry. Facebook. Hi, let's see what kind of a unicorn you are. Hey, when's your birthday? When's this? Fuck off. Go away. Stop that shit.
I don't actually have to get a friend request accepted to get the information off ancestry.com though.
Yeah, good point. All right, we digress. Yes, exactly to Peter's point. I mean, and again, most of us honestly hate biometrics because, and this is why I think passwords have been around so bloody long, because when you lose a stupid thing, you change it. Who cares? You lose these buggers or this damn stupid thing, you're screwed. It's done, one and done. So, yeah, all right, we digress. Back to the questions. I apologize.
So before, somebody said they appreciate your points very much in terms of sort of where the state of the industry is, but they want to hear more in terms of your deep observations. What is the alternative in terms of architectures? Where does the architecture need to be? Is there something better than where we are right now? So I guess it's like, where do you think the future is?
It's not an architecture thing. It's a human thing. Can we please stop chasing technology? Take a step back. Remember, people, process, technology. Let's go back to people. Let's go back to the processes. And for once in our lives, take our eye off of chasing more blinky shit. And I think that's the biggest thing for me, is we need to go back to the people. And that's training, education, helping, understanding, listening, collaborate. It's all the soft skills that most of us in the industry have forgotten. This is another reason why we need, head shrinks and everybody else to come into this industry, because we need more diversity across all avenues in this industry. And that's huge. We don't have it and we need it. And so to me, it's not about chasing technology and different architecture. Let's go back to the people.
Yeah, same. I feel sometimes that we've actually forgotten how to think and how to look at problems because information is just readily available in our hand. Technology is great. That it always comes back to the person. It always comes back to, how are we going to harden, as Sans says it, how are we going to harden the human OS? We can technical control this thing to death. But I agree that we have to start educating users on how to even use the technology, and how to use what's already here and how to look at these problems. So yeah, I could ramble, but I'll stop. That's kind of where I am with it.
Okay, so I feel like people think, maybe because of the movies, they think Tom Cruise is going to be hanging from the ceiling or something. Like, that just does not happen. It's like your grandma posted her password on the monitor, or why crack a password when you can get a password from someone else and just walk right into the door. Or
we are not all in rollerblades.
No, exactly. And I mean, social engineering, that takes barely any technology at all, and that's huge. That's some of the biggest wins that hackers ever get, is to convince someone to give them a bit of information that they need to be able to get in. So I agree. It's not a write a check problem to be solved, and technology can't solve all these problems. So there is a definite human factor here, and it's a very big human factor.
Debbie, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, as a humans, especially down here in the South, we have sort of like an innate, ingrained desire to please and to make people happy. And yes, sir, and no, ma'am, and most of the time we would rather just give the information that someone's asking for than to have to confront them. So until we look at that, we kind of, I don't want the whole world to be salty and cantankerous like I am. But we do have to build in that sort of challenge mentality.
But at least I want people to ask one more question. When the director of the FBI calls you up and says, please send me 100 prepaid business cards because I'm doing something special, we don't think about that. We don't, again, I'm going to steal Ryan Cloutier. We do the security shit show on Thursday night. Ryan has an amazing way of putting it. We are analog people in a digital world. If we actually thought about that for 1 minute and thought in a real world, is the director of the FBI going to knock on my door and go, hey, can I have a whole bunch of prepaid cards? You'd be like, no, sod off. But in a digital world, we don't think that way. So to me, I just want humans to ask one more question.
That's a good point. So we have a couple more questions. It says here, at this point, is it fair to say that all of the vast majority of successful server-side mainframe password and ransomware attacks are now due to management failure of implementing best practices?
Oh man, I mean, they loaded the round deep into that one. No, unfortunately, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say it's not quite that absolute. I would say a lot of the time, yes, it's management, but quite often I find I don't know a lot of people that get up in the morning and say, I really want to do terribly at my job today. And I don't work around a lot of people that aspire to be mediocre. I work with a lot of people that are really, really tired. And I look at companies and work with governments where they brought a third-party vendor in to deploy something because they didn't have the people internally, and then the vendor was let go with no ongoing support. And there's an expectation that these three people in a government can go and grasp and take care of that. So I don't think that there are enough hands on deck most of the time. I also believe that there are some of the systems that we're wanting to patch that sometimes patching and deployment is delayed because of the complexity or the role of that system. And, and if COVID's taught us everything, taught us anything, it's that we've not always thought of everything. So I don't want to just lump it right on management. I think some of it is just exhausted people that don't have enough resources, and programs are launched and projects are launched without thinking about what the long-term impact is going to be and the technical debt involved in carrying and feeding for all of these things. That's my thoughts, at least.
Any other thoughts?
Come on, Chris. I know you want some of that one.
Oh, I was going to let Dorothy and Debbie actually have that conversation for a minute. I want to shut up and see what they got to say.
Sure. I mean, it's almost like a death by 1,000 paper cuts. So it's not just one thing. It's many, many things over the years that compound. So it's, again, it's not, I wish it were just one thing. If it were one thing, we wouldn't even be having these conversations. But it's a multitude of things at many different levels that fail. Unfortunately, again, hackers, they go for the lowest hanging fruit. So let's say they have 10 companies they're looking at to do an attack with. They're going to take the one that's the easiest. So the one that has the most paper cuts, maybe that's the one that they're going to go for, because that's the easier target for them.
Or even, like the weakest link, we look at the hack on Dun & Bradstreet, what great company, based in technology and data. And their major breach was through a vendor in Massachusetts. So it goes back to my point of understand all of your connections, your vendors, use the same critical analytical framework for your vendors that you use for your own company. And the 3 words, again, train, train, train.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to bring up, so the Tesla thing that almost happened, it didn't happen, where they targeted an employee and said they would give them X amount of money to do something. That works. Unfortunately, it didn't work in this situation, but in some situations that does work. Like, that happens.
I just want to know how they got from Russia to the United States. I don't know about you, but I can't travel anyway. They won't let us. So somehow or other, they, I don't know if they came on a boat or what they did, maybe drove somewhere. I don't know. So we have one more question. It's quick. It says, are 2 devices required for 2-factor authentication?
Is this in regards to FIDO or just general?
In general. Do you need to have 2 devices with you to access secured information?
No, it's the something you know and the something you have. I mean, if you're looking at a separation, so worst case scenario, it's a passcode and a fingerprint, or a passcode and a facial, or in a lot of cases, it's your passcode. And then for those of you that do the online banking, they'll send you a code, especially if you're coming from a new device, they'll send you a code to a known telephone number or to a known text message or something. So 2-factor merely and simply means it's 2 factors. It's 2 things to validate who you are or what you are. It could be your left footprint and your forehead print on something. It's just 2 factors.
But it should be one of the different factors, like a knowledge factor, inheritance factor, or the ownership factor. So you should combine one of those 3, not have 2 knowledge factors or.
Perfectly stated. Yeah, exactly, Peter.
Right. And then on the flip side of that, if you have a hacker that's trying to get information from you, you need to change up your communication method with them. So if they're going to send you an email, you need to ask them to call you. And a lot of times that stops them in their tracks because they want to continue on the same way that they contacted you to begin with.
Very good point. Well, it looks like we're hitting on the half hour for the Q&A, so we have to bring our wonderful session to a close. And I want to thank you all. You were amazing. And thank everybody who participated in the audience as well for their great questions. And, thanks again. We'll make the presentation available via, I think, email or, the MIT Enterprise Forum will make that those presentation slides available after the event.
Well, thank you for having us. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right.
Enjoyed it immensely.
Oh, thank you.